Ladies and gentlemen, let's Retro Gaming Intercom video. Microsoft basically broke the internet last week when Phil Spencer made an announcement that they were thinking that, we might allow an upgradable Xbox One because we feel that it would, paraphrasing, it would basically keep up with the demands of games. Now, there was a whole bunch of conjecture on how this would work. Some people, I don't know why they would think this, but they actually thought they were going to have to basically have like an upgrade kit for the Xbox One and physically open the machine. Others assumed that you would probably have to ship back your system to Microsoft. Other people would assume that it would be an external box, and others assumed it would be a new upgradable SKU which Microsoft would eventually release. However, that does not seem to be the case at all. During the last episode of Major Nelson's podcast, Phil Spencer decided to add some clarification to all of this. And this is a quote: "Am I going to break open my console and start upgrading individual pieces of my console? That's not the plan. There's something special about what happens with a console. You buy an appliance-like device, you plug it into your TV, it works when you plug it in. I'm not going to ship a screwdriver set with every console that comes out. What I'm saying is, as hardware innovations happen, we want to be able to embrace those in the console space and make those available. Maybe not have to wait 7 or 8 years for things to happen, but right now we're obviously not announcing hardware. I'm happy with the console we have, the platform we built on top of that console, and the constant innovation and the games we have there. But as a longer term vision statement, I want to make sure people understand that what I think is good for the console space in addition to being good for the PC space." Now, is he saying that there is going to be no more Xbox One? No, this is the second part of his statement. In the showcase, I wanted to stand up and talk about this vision that we have, which is a longer term vision. People have asked me, what are we going to do with another console? And I say that I fully expect we will. And people say, well, why do you say fully expect? Why don't you just say yes? Hey, I'm in the job now, and I kind of make the decisions based on what's today. I can't always predict the future. But I say that if we're going to strategy moving on, the strategy is a long-term vision that includes multiple hardware generations of both console and, frankly, PC. So I want to explain that what we're doing today makes the console ecosystem better, in a way, because I personally, as well as watching what happens in the industry, I've been to the end of the generation. The step function that happens is not something I embrace. I think it's something that we're better at. I see it in music, I see it in books, I see it in movies, and when I buy digital content, that digital content stays with me and I'm able to use it when I get out of it and get new devices. Now, there are several things you can take away from this, especially the last part of the statement. He wasn't really super clear, so I'm just going to clarify it. What he's basically saying is that they don't like how when you buy a console, often you have this disconnect from device A to device B. For example, do you remember the original Xbox, the one back in the day? You didn't really transfer much from that to the Xbox 360, right? It was kind of a complete disconnect. And that's just kind of how it was. With the Xbox 360, the Xbox One, there was certainly more that you would bring to the table, but he wants to make it a seamless transition, so I'm assuming this would most likely mean things such as backwards compatibility being a lot more seamless, which would probably indicate that that's going to be a priority with them in the future. This would mean, theoretically, that they could sell you a new box, and I'm putting words into his mouth here, let's say every 3 to 4 years, a cheaper box, and you could basically take your game disc, which would maybe just be labelled Xbox, and put it into the new box, if that made any sense. And that makes a good logical leap. Now, I don't really think anyone really expected a home user to get a kit which was basically a GPU, a new CPU, and start doing soldering themselves. Seriously, it's not freaking easy to lift pins on processors. I've done it. It's a bitch to do it on a console, especially if you get like a high pin count chip and it's got really tiny legs. It's not easy. And let's face it, 99.99% of your customers will not have the technical aptitude, or to be honest, even if they had the technical aptitude, they would probably not want to risk balking the machine. Therefore, realistically, it was always going to be an external device, or a new SKU that they would have to release for the Xbox. I think we all kind of knew that. An external device, how that would connect, it was kind of a mystery because as far as I could see there wasn't really a port available. The USB 3 ports, the bandwidth on them was questionable, and it didn't really make a great deal of sense. So a secondary SKU which was released, which was potentially upgradable, was realistically the only option that was, I guess, available to Microsoft at this point. However, with all of that said, and I'm going to not talk about the PC side of things with this because it's a whole different issue by itself. I don't necessarily know if people are super happy with the Xbox One as is, and I don't necessarily refer to the actual games on it because I think the games are great, and this comes to a different discussion about exclusivity and, you know, timed exclusives. It's like, if a game is available on both systems at the same time, essentially speaking, people are just buying the PlayStation 4 version because most of the time, not all of the time, most of the time, the PS4 version runs better. Now you might say to yourself, well, gee, I don't really care about 900p to 1080p, or small subtle differences. But it's really hard for a person to say to themselves, you know, I'm okay to play with a lower resolution. There are certainly times where I would prefer that so that I could play with friends. For example, if all of my buddies were playing on Xbox One and I had no one online to play with the PS4, I would certainly buy the Xbox One version because you've got the better ecosystem of friends. However, if that's not the case, and particularly for me who primarily spends their money to buy single player games now, I would prefer to play them on the PS4 or the PC where I've got that higher resolution, higher graphics fidelity, because it just makes more sense to me. It's like you're getting a better version of the game. It doesn't play any better maybe unless it's got major frame rate hitches, and that can affect both consoles. We all know what the problems with Assassin's Creed Syndicate were back on, Unity were, with the Xbox One and the PS4's major frame rate dips, and the PS4 actually did worse than the Xbox One for the frame rate. And it's not the only game that's been like that. There's been a couple of other PS4 games which have been objectively frame rate wise worse than the Xbox One. Now there have been patches of course which have improved things, but just typically speaking, you know, most users would rather buy the game which gives them the best content. And that's kind of the whole thing with the 1 hour of free content that Ubisoft have been getting backhanders with a lot of the time with Sony, where they've got like these extra story missions. It's not necessarily that it's, let's say you don't own an Xbox One, you don't own a PlayStation 4, you're not going to go and say, well, I really love Assassin's Creed so much that I'm going to buy a PS4 just for that 1 extra hour of single player content. No, you're not. You're just going to maybe either YouTube it, or you're just going to say, sucks, whatever, I don't care, I'm going to play something else. However, I feel that if you own both systems, you're probably going to make a decision in your mind and say, I'd rather play it on the PS4 if it's single player because you've got that extra little bit of content. And I think that's why that's why a lot of users were kind of excited about this upgrade, because mentally they were saying to themselves, I wonder what that's going to do for the games. However, in Phil's defense, one of the problems with this, aside from the logistics of being able to upgrade and the pissed users, would be games developers. Now I know, technically speaking, you could have an upgradable system or a set of options because you can do that on the PC, right? A user can say, well, I can't afford on my system with the GPU that I've got to run ultra high quality textures with HBAO lighting, and I can't do that with MSA x 8. It just doesn't work. But I can run with FXAA or SMAA or whatever, and I can run at like high quality textures, and that's fine. And obviously developers give that choice to the users. You can choose what, you know, settings you've got, what resolution you're running, and that's down to you. So I guess that could have been an option with an upgradable Xbox One. However, I feel that some developers were a bit nervous about it, the prospect, and it has happened before, as I mentioned. With the SNES, it wasn't too much of a big deal with the Super FX chip, because essentially you could bundle it right into the cartridge. There were some problems with that. Basically increased the cost of the actual cart, and Sega did the same with, I can't remember what it was called, I think it was called SVR. The chip was called SVR, I believe, but it was basically the chip that appeared in just one Sega Genesis game. It was the Virtua Racing, I believe. And supposedly Sega were thinking of releasing that chip for other games, including Virtua Fighter 1 on the Genesis, but they decided against it because it was so bloody expensive. It basically doubled the price of the games. And a fun fact, at one point, according to leaks, they were actually thinking of releasing that as like, I guess you could say, an action replay card. So you could basically just plug that cartridge into your system and then the game into the cartridge, and that would basically act as the secondary processor. So you would only have to buy the hardware once. But of course, that still meant for developers that they would have to worry about the percentage of users who would do that, and in the end Sega didn't do that. They released the really successful 32X, which was obviously the right choice, and I don't think anyone ever criticised them for that, so I definitely think they made the right decision there. Anyway, I'm getting slightly off topic. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.